Today we're talking about the lessons learned from some horror stories of Winnipeg real estate. And these are whether you're investing here in Winnipeg or whether you're deciding to move here. So let's get into it. Okay, so this one applies for a lot of homes in Winnipeg, and whether you're moving here or you're deciding to invest in here, this applies to both of those. But a lot of houses in Winnipeg, even in really good areas, over the years have seen some sort of water damage. Now, why does this occur? Well, in some areas, they were actually built on top of streams, and so they actually got some flooding and shifting over the years. But for the most part, it's two reasons. One is that Winnipeg is actually a flood zone along the Red River. You see, our water control, because the land is so flat, when the water levels rise in the river or we get a heavy rain, there's a lot of overland water that can get into basements. Now, the other way that water can get in is through sewer backup. Because we have a combined wastewater and sewer system, if the sewer is overrun with rain, snow melt, a bunch of water for whatever reason, sometimes it can go back up through the sewer and it comes up through the first point of contact in a house, which is usually the basement. Okay, and unfortunately, even though this has never happened to one of my clients because I coach them on how to avoid these situations, I have heard of stories about people who have bought homes and then that first spring, which is typically when there's the most amount of water moving around, usually from snow melt and then the heavy rains we get, they had a ton of water in their basement and it was a heavy price tag to fix it. Now, the risk of having water in your basement is that although water can damage a ton of stuff, it also allows for further issues down the road, such as cracks in your foundation. Water pooling can lead to mold issues. It can also lead to structural defects because water finds its way to a lowest point, right? And so sometimes if that's through your wall, that could be an issue. Okay, and the way to get around this is that typically I guide my clients, if you are buying a property, for the first year at least, I always recommend getting the sewer backup and the overland water insurance, right? Because at least go through one full cycle of rain and snow melt to understand if it's going to be a problem in your property or not. Okay, that is the backup plan. If it's an issue at the present, the best way to address it is to look at the property's grading and its eaves troughs and downspouts. So one of the best ways to avoid getting water in your basement is to make sure that when it rains and the water pools off your roof, it's pushed away from the house. That way it can't go along the foundation and into your basement. Okay, for sewer backup, you can install what's called a backwater valve, which is essentially a one-way valve that lets the wastewater go away from your house but not come back up through the sewer. Now, these are pretty inexpensive to install, relatively speaking, considering how much it costs to fix your basement if you get water in it. And on a note of that, if you do get sewer backup, it's exactly that. And so it's not great water to get in your house either. Okay, these backwater valves can usually be installed in the main pipe access that you will find in the basement. Sometimes it's buried under carpet, so you have to look for it. Sometimes homes will actually already have it installed, which is a bonus. But if you are living close to the river or somewhere where the sewer system is a bit dated, it's really important to consider getting one of these or having one installed when you purchase a property. Okay, and one of my favorite tips, and this is something a lot of people don't actually think about, is when you are buying a house, you can look at the street and see, compared to the neighbors' homes, which property is the lowest. Because water always goes to the lowest point, and even though it might not seem like a lot, you really only notice this when it rains a lot, and you can see on the street where the water is pooling, whose house is it in front of, right? And so if water is always moving to the lowest point, and your house is that lowest point on that street, your house is going to get all that overland water. Even if you're grading and your eaves are pushing the water away, it's coming from above, and you're going to have pooling around your house, which you do not want. Okay, so don't buy the lowest property on a street. Okay, so when you're investing in real estate, we've all heard about the horror stories of tenants not paying, or maybe a bunch of junk overload, or the fires burning down properties. The issues with that is that usually there is solutions in the sense of evicting tenants, insurance claims for fire damage, etc. But some horror stories that I have seen in the last year that weren't very common have been copper plumbing being ripped out of a house, all of the copper electrical wiring being ripped out of a house, all of the appliances being taken and sold. And these don't really have more standard solutions other than screening your tenants properly. Okay, and all of these situations happen in the north end of Winnipeg, which is one of the most tempting areas for real estate investors probably in Canada because the properties are so cheap. But this is where having a good property management company can be the do or die of your real estate investment, because if they're putting in people who are going to rip out the copper and plumbing and electrical from your walls, I'm not talking just like cutting it out nicely and pulling it through. No, like they ripped it out of the walls. This is gonna open you up to all sorts of damages and be very expensive to replace and probably make you not want to invest in real estate anymore. Now, obviously, the people who did this damage are going to suffer legal repercussions. They're not just going to get away with it. I mean, if you have the tenant information properly, then there will be legal repercussions through the government and the court system. But again, this is something you want to avoid as a real estate investor. So it's really important to A, screen your tenants, but B, work with good property managers. And good property managers are hard to find. This is why I recommend, if you are local to Winnipeg, you self-manage so that you can put the correct people into your investment, because your asset is probably the most important physical thing to you as a real estate investor. Yes, you have other emotional, spiritual needs that are more important to you, like family and your friends and whatnot. But in terms of physical assets, the real estate itself is very important, and you don't want somebody who's going to trash the place. Now, and I say trash the place, but there is a difference between those who, throw a hammer at the drywall and those who rip out all your electrical, which again is something you want to avoid, because that's going to be rent loss for a couple of months. Replacing all the materials is probably going to be an upfront cost for you while you wait for the legal battle, so to speak, to be settled. And so these other two problems that we've talked about have come from when you're buying a property and then mistakes you make while owning the property. And so that's buying property that has potential damage without understanding the repercussions and putting bad tenants in once you actually own the property. But what about selling the property? Are there any horror stories there? And the answer is simply yes. And so the biggest one that I see occur over and over again is renovations to increase the value of your property. Now, a lot of people, when they buy a place, whether they're flippers or just regular home sellers, will try and renovate to pull out as much equity as possible to sell their home for the highest dollar. This is pretty normal, because once you've used a home for a couple of years, say 10 years, usually there's some wear and tear that's gone into the house that you sort of want to replace so you could sell it for top dollar. However, when you are renovating, you need to understand that comps should drive your renovations. You shouldn't just renovate based on whatever you think would sell. This is where consulting a real estate expert or an agent could really help, because they could show you the data on, okay, you own a house that has a boiler system. Is it worth it to put in forced air? Okay, well, here's what the homes with the boiler system is selling for. Here's what the homes that with forced air are selling for. What's the difference? If there is any, is it a big factor? I've seen homes where people have put fireplaces in the bedrooms, and that costed an additional $5,000 to $10,000 just for getting the insert fireplace, as well as running all the electrical, repairing the drywall. They had to take out a room to fit it in with their walk-in closet. When I ran an analysis for them, the comparables, none of them had that fireplace in the master bedroom, and so it wasn't really necessary, and that's just an added expense you don't need. One of the biggest ones is bedroom count. Does that fourth or fifth bedroom really impact the sale price? And the tricky part is, in some neighborhoods it really does, but in other neighborhoods it doesn't, which is why you always need to look at the sold data to understand what are the comps doing. The comps should drive your decisions. Another big one, finishing basements. Sometimes finishing basements has a huge ROI. It is totally worth it. Other times, not so much. You'll be lucky if you get a return on your money at all, if you even make back the money you would get by finishing the basement. Okay, and so when you're selling, or a couple years before you're deciding to sell, and you're deciding on which renovations you should do, consult with an agent. They can guide you into telling you what the current market is like, so that you can understand, okay, these are the renovations we should do to get a good return. The other renovations are just gonna be your personal preference, and you're sort of taking a risk by testing the market to see whether or not people prefer that. Okay, so those are the three biggest issues that I have seen when people are buying, trying to rent out their property, or trying to sell their property here in Winnipeg. And if you found any value from this, or you want to get in touch about buying, renting, selling, investing, whatever at all in the Winnipeg market, contact me. My details are below, and I'll see you in the next video.